My name is Kate Milliken. I am the founder of My Counter Pain, and you are here at our second Empower by webcast that we have put on. Our first one was actually on MS and diet. We will share that link with you. That's something you're interested with. But today we are talking about MS and fatigue. And I'm super excited about this webcast. And you'll find out when you meet the people that are involved in this webcast why. But also because fatigue is such a huge deal to all of us. Fatigue is actually the most commonly reported symptom of MS, and it's considered to be one of the main causes that impairs quality of life. Some people say that 90% of us MSers actually deal with fatigue. There's also a correlation that has been established between MS, fatigue, and depression. And the causes of fatigue remain unknown, although I'm liking to think that might be changing thanks to people like Dr. Don Mahad, who you are going to meet today. For the record, Dr. Mahad is with us actually from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And little did we think about the fact that as a result of being in Scotland, he has a fairly weak connection, which is why he is awkwardly holding a phone in the right side of his hand. But we're rolling on here. Don is a combination of a clinician and a scientist. So he spends 4 days a week in the lab. He spends 1 day a week seeing patients, and he works for the Center of Neurodegeneration at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And he's doing a lot of studying in the role of mitochondria in MS. So super happy to have him here. And before we get into him, I'd also like to introduce My Counter Pain user, Diana Fristacci. She is in the lower left-hand corner. She has been living with MS since 2001. She not only is a user of My Counter Pain, but she's also a big blogger on My Counter Pain. And we're really glad to have her. So before we dive into the work of Dr. Mahad, Diana, I'd like to welcome you first of all to our show.
Thanks.
And I want to talk to you a little bit about your personal experience, not only of a brief snapshot of MS and what you're dealing with, but how fatigue has been in your life.
Well, I was actually diagnosed in 2011. So I have experienced fatigue in my life. A lot of it is difficulty waking up in the morning, getting out of bed, the body dragging. And I also have a lot of social fatigue, being in very social settings with a lot of people and engaging with a lot of people. And after situations like that, I always need to decompress, have some time to myself, because it does get very exhausting.
In light of having lived a number of years before MS and arguably being tired from staying out too late, working really hard, do you feel that there was a distinct difference for you in the fatigue you felt after being diagnosed with MS?
Yes, certainly. It was harder to shake off. In my early 20s, a night of partying, I could just go out, wake up, and go through my day. And nowadays with MS, it's a little more challenging. If I go out, I can't stay out as late. I need more hours of sleep. So it does definitely take a lot more out of me to do the things that were a lot more simple back in the day before MS.
And I personally remember when I was diagnosed, the way I described MS fatigue was like if you had ever been pregnant, having pregnancy fatigue with a gravitational pull. It's a really, really intense feeling, at least it was for me. So Dr. Mahad, let's have you start by kind of establishing what fatigue is, from a scientific view, kind of give us your one-on-one on how you define fatigue.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Kate. So my experience has really been based from the patients that I've seen at the Mellon Center in Ohio, where I did my fellowship, and where I work here now at the Handling Clinic in Edinburgh. And when I talk to patients, I think quite a few actually find it very difficult to precisely describe what they mean by fatigue, and it seems to vary quite a bit. And that's, kind of typical for MS, because so many things in MS is so heterogeneous and so varied. So there was a paper in one of the slides, maybe if we could skip to the next one. Karen, a group of clinicians tried to sub-classify fatigue into different categories. This, I think, is very helpful from a research perspective. And they divided fatigue into two main aspects. One was a perceptual, more of a sort of a subjective feeling of fatigue. This is the part that sometimes is quite difficult to describe and characterize. It's also slightly difficult to measure. And compared to the second part, which was more of a performance-related fatigue, this was kind of objective, it's measurable, and the performance-related fatigue actually has two components. There's a cognitive component and there's a motor component. And by the performance-related fatigue, I think what the authors are saying is if you are walking or you're running or jogging, and after a certain amount of exertion, then you get this exhaustion feeling, the fatigue, and also neurologically you may notice symptoms like difficulty controlling your legs or lifting the foot, balance problems, the strength problems, or the leg might feel a little bit more stiff. And then you rest for a while, and then you can get going again. So this is really the physical, the motor performance-related aspect. And the cognitive aspect is if you're doing some reading a book or doing some work, after a period of time you find your processing speed might slow down or your ability to recall words. And again, if you put your book down and you rest for a while and pick it up again, you could carry on. So this kind of a reversible performance-related aspect is what they mean by the second category.
I think it's really interesting, Dr. Mahad, you know, the whole idea of kind of as you call it, perceptions of fatigue that are physiological, you know, that can be treated, you know, a thyroid issue or something like that. And then breaking potential fatigue for people living with MS, not only in exerting themselves physically, but actually doing something like reading a book, or as Diana spoke about, actually going to a party, having some cognitive processes, and actually in some ways bringing on that MS fatigue. Diana, can you relate to what he said?
Yeah, most definitely. And one of the, you said motor fatigue, and to me, I process that as like speaking. So when I do get fatigued and I get very tired, I start to slur my words. I can't find the words. And I never, until you said that, and I've known that happens, but I didn't associate it with fatigue. You know, I didn't make that connection. So that is very fascinating, but I do have a question, if that's okay. A lot of times where I'm like, oh, you know, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I've done this, I've done that. All the people that I know that don't have MS, they say, oh yes, me too. And so, oh yes, I also have trouble waking up in the morning after a night out. So it's very challenging to see what is MS and what is regular fatigue for people, since everyone seems to want to have it.
Right. Diana, hold on one second. I think that the computer just froze, but we're going to get them back on the line. I think that this is definitely a new way of looking in the bigger picture of fatigue, because you usually just think, you know, you run a running race and then it's really tiring, right? So
yeah. I do have to recover, like.
Hey, Dr. Mahad, so the computer just froze, but everybody's still on. So we left off with Diana talking about her fatigue. Did you catch that? Well, I would say the cognitive processing is something that Diana feels is, you know, in terms of slurring your words and having motor function issues as a result of fatigue. Can you comment on that?
Sure. So Diana, was there a kind of a performance-related aspect
if
to it?
I work out, if I'm very active, I just get overwhelmed with, I suppose, in this conversation with fatigue, and it becomes challenging for me to speak as clearly as I'd like. So if I'm like with a lot of people, I'm like, hi, how are you? Like, eventually I'm be like, start slurring my words to people.
Right. Right. So there's going to be two aspects to the symptoms, right? I mean, some of it's going to be through the MS, inflammation, and so on. That's affecting the function of the neuron, demyelination. So that, and also the loss of axons and neurons would give you or give individuals with MS a fixed problem, right? So slurring words or balance problems and so on. It's the fatigue on top of it, which makes things worse as you use that particular system. It's what's scientifically, at least, very interesting, and that's what intrigues me, because partly because it's measurable. Okay, so you could do whatever the activity that brings it on or makes things worse, and it seems to be pretty reproducible, and we can actually model that in the laboratory using animals. So that's the really exciting part. Now the perceptual component is tricky, right? Because it's hard to ask animals how they feel and so on. But you could actually get the mice doing things which the control healthy mice would have no problems doing. The mice that got an MS-like problem that we've modeled actually really struggles, and they have a very similar thing. So physical activity, they get tired. Corinne, I don't know if you want to put one of the slides. Next one. So I could explain some of the behavioral things that we do with these mice. Essentially, what we've done is, using genetic techniques, we've just manipulated one gene. Here it is, specifically in the nerve cells. So this is a central nervous system problem in the mice, and then we manipulated these organelle or the powerhouses called mitochondria. So in these mice, the nerve cells can't generate enough.
And Dr. Mahad, let me stop you right there, just so everybody's on the same page, right? So Dr. Mahad is doing some studies in mitochondria, and the way that mitochondria is defined are powerhouses of the cells. So everybody has cells, and when people act normally, their mitochondria, the energy within each cell is restored, and there has been shown that people living with MS, may have an issue with actually restocking their energy cells of the mitochondria. And this is what Dr. Mahad was studying. So go ahead, Dr. Mahad.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kate. So here, what you can see is these powerhouses called mitochondria. And they've got these finger-like structures, and in them you have 5 enzymes that essentially leads to the use of oxygen to generate energy. And really, as Kate mentioned, the foundation for our work on developing the animals was really the observation of these powerhouses being damaged in the autopsy tissue of patients who've had multiple sclerosis, typically progressive MS. And then we also looked at the existing models and discovered that the damage to these organelles aren't really modeled properly in any of the existing models. So that's why we developed that mouse that shows the fatigue. So if you can go back to that slide, find the one with the mouse. Okay. So what we did was we actually switched off one of those enzymes in this powerhouse called mitochondria, specifically in the neurons. And these animals eventually develop neurodegeneration. So they eventually lose the axons and the nerve cells. But before the structure actually starts to get affected, the mice shows performance-related fatigue. So if you go to the maybe 2 more. So what we do is the mice are actually very good at running. And overnight, an average mouse runs about 3 or 4 miles. So that's just their natural behavior. So here on the top right, you can see like little discs and different compartments. And what you do is you put these mice, there's a little rod in the middle which turns at different speeds. and you can train these mice so they can run at a certain speed for a period of time. And on the top left, you see this graph where what we've done is for each mouse after training, we put them on this treadmill and get them to run for like 2 minutes. And then we take them off and repeat that every 5 minutes. We do that 8 times. The black line, you can see the healthy mice can manage the 2 minutes without any problems, all 8 times. Whereas the mice that's got an energy problem within the neurons really struggle. You can see the red line. Each step, their performance just drops bit by bit. And if you just put them back into that environment and come back and test them again, say 4 hours later or the next day, they're back up to their baseline level. So it's a behavior that we see in the lab which really aligns with what some of the MS patients describe with the performance-related or physical aspects.
So I was just going to say, so I feel like it's been pretty well known in the world of MS fatigue that fatigue is caused by things of a loss of axon or a loss of myelin or deconditioning muscles. But this whole idea of actually looking at energy depletion as a cause of MS fatigue is something new. So as a result of starting to see results like these, what are next steps that might come out of your work?
Yeah. So our goal really is to work with the Progressive MS Alliance. So this is an alliance of international multiple sclerosis societies, so the US, Canadian, UK, Australian, Italian, and so on. Now I think it's over 10 MS societies. So we've got together and recognized the unsolved issues in MS. Fatigue is one of the things they recognize, also progressive MS. And we've been fortunate enough to get some funding from them. So going forward, really, their mission is, if we're successful in the next step, is for us to come up with 2 or more potential drugs or compounds that could address progressive MS and other aspects of MS, so including fatigue, for example. And so we're quite excited to, get not just increased understanding from these animals, but actually identify drug targets and work with the drug companies and really to discover some drugs that's going to address.
So that's one thing. The way that Dr. Mahad and I actually met was at an event where I was introduced to the Progressive MS Alliance. And again, this is the whole approach of scientists, instead of all being in silos, being with white lab coats and wildly competitive to find the cure. The MS scientific world has really realized that progressive MS is super serious and super difficult to solve. And as a result, all of them are pooling their data and talking strategy and comparing notes to try to better this. And Dr. Mahad is taking this angle of MS fatigue and mitochondria, knowing how important it is for the progressive population. There's a question that I'd like to ask actually from Tiffany Campbell, who is my counterpain user. It's great to see you, Tiffany. When Diana was talking about feeling like there's cognitive fatigue after exerting energy, do you feel like that could be related to the mitochondria?
It's possible, Tiffany. I think it's possible. But obviously, as Kate, you alluded to earlier, there's multiple reasons for fatigue, even in the performance-related component, right? So there's loss of axons, there's loss of myelin, inflammation, and then not in the case of cognition, but in the case of physical activity, the muscle changes. So it's going to be complex. It's going to have multiple reasons for having cognitive fatigue, but this angle is a novel angle. So I think if you think about how we might be treating cognitive fatigability in the future, the number one thing is going to be really controlling inflammation. So it would be very important to be on the right disease-modifying therapy, make sure you're not having any breakthrough disease, and it's well controlled as possible. And the second therapeutic aspect which people are working on internationally is to really to restore the myelin sheath of the axon. So I think this is going to improve performance, and it's going to definitely help the cognitive fatigability. And there's a lot of work going on, stem cells, and trying to get the brain's own stem cells to try and improve the restoration of myelin. And the third thing that we are trying to highlight with the Progressive MS Alliance is this energy failure. And particularly when there's loss of myelin, the energy failure becomes even more relevant. And we think this is another therapeutic avenue. So I see it as having a three-pronged approach to first controlling inflammation, trying to restore myelin, and then also...
So Dr. Mahad, talk to me about what you know, because this is your wheelhouse, in terms of treatments coming down the pike for MS and fatigue. Talk about what you've seen so far, outside of your own studies even.
Okay, so Kate, I guess the first thing, as mentioned earlier, is make sure that your disease is well controlled. So be on the right disease-modifying therapy, make sure there's no breakthrough disease. The scans don't show any activity of enhancing lesions, gadolinium. So that's number one. And there are pharmacological agents that have been tried with limited benefits, such as amantadine, and this is really an ongoing need. You really just don't have effective pharmacological agents. Physical therapy can actually help physical performance. That's increasing evidence now that it can also benefit your cognitive aspects. So after exercise, your information...
And wait, let me just interrupt you for a second, Dr. Mahad, because I think there are a lot of people that when they think about physical therapy, one way of thinking about it is it makes you more tired. How do you respond to that?
Right. So this is, one has to be careful. So, I guess we all have limitations, right? And even physiology, we just can't keep running or jogging forever. So our bodies do get fatigued, and we have to stop at some point. So it's all along the spectrum. So with MS, your capacity is reduced a little. So far, we don't think by exercising or using, say, cognitive processing, you're actually doing any damage. So there's no evidence for that at all, even in any experimental models. So although you might feel tired and feel like you're struggling to do things, you're not actually doing any damage. But the key thing is to work within the limitations. So on a good day, if you feel you could do a little bit more, do that, and knowing that the next day or two or a few days is going to be tough because you're going to feel worse, and then try and repeat that again when you feel up to it, and gradually build it up, and gradually make these episodes maybe slightly longer and more frequent, and just knowing that you're just going to have good and bad days.
Yeah.
And that's
Anna, you want to say something?
Yes, that's very helpful to hear, because, for instance, I do work out, and I was kickboxing, and I know, Kate, that's, I believe, one of the workouts you like to do, and I would work out so hard. I'd be like, I don't have MS, and I would work out the hardest I've ever worked out in my life to prove some kind of point, I suppose, to myself. And then I would crash. And I don't mean like a day or two. My body would get sick. I would be out of commission for like 2 weeks. Is that something that is common? Or is that, it could be like the flu season was coming around and I just got sick because I'm around different people. But I do feel that when I do heavy activity, I need a couple of weeks to recover. Is that normal?
So let's take that as like a more general question, because
Right.
Dr. Mahad cannot physically tell you the answer.
Of course.
But I think, in the realm of actually, really exerting your body, the effect, I think you can speak to.
Right. Thank you, Kate.
You're welcome. Dr. Mahad?
Props.
Okay, Kate. So I heard a bit something that was quite thin. Diana, what you're saying was you do quite a bit of kickboxing and you kind of exert yourself a lot.
Yes.
And for that couple of weeks.
Yeah, just generally, is that a normal response in terms
I
of...
stopped going.
And totally right. Absolutely, because I mean we don't fully understand why it takes so much longer to kind of get back to baseline. So like the mice that we've developed, hopefully that's going to give us some molecular insight, right, into the symptom. So what part of the nerve cell is really doing this to your body, you know? And once we identify which part of, for an example, if it's the synapse, where the chemical communications between the cells, nerve cells, we can then really dive in and see what sort of alterations there is at a protein and a molecular level, and to see if we could actually manipulate that using drugs to try and make the recovery faster, if you like, improve the capacity. So this is what we're trying to do. I think right now, I think it's fair to say that we don't fully understand kind of scientifically what's going on behind this kind of the lag in the recovery. But we're hoping that this kind of experiment, bringing the science into fatigue, is going to really try and help.
So, Dr. Mahad, I know I kind of interrupted you. Do you want to speak a little bit to the treatments that are coming down the pike?
So in terms of specifically for fatigue, Kate, I'm not really aware of any, but there's new treatments that have been tested, say, in terms of remyelination therapy. So there is a drug called Lingo, which it's not been reported yet, but there's been abstract form reports suggesting that in the visual pathway there's some improvement after optic neuritis. So this drug, Lingo, is trying to enhance remyelination. So how this might actually impact performance-related fatigue, for an example, it would be an important question. So that's an open space, so we have to keep an eye out for it. There's also other experimentally promising agents like antihistamines that's been tested in different animal models, again directing at repairing myelin. So my feeling is that anything that's going to repair myelin is going to really help with this performance-related fatigue aspect. And partly because it's going to protect the nerve cell from the changes in the body temperature, and it's also going to make it much more efficient in terms of energy. So when you've got the myelin, the nerve needs a lot less energy to
so we're getting some nice notes on the right side of people's questions, and I don't know if anyone wants to try to call in. We can give it a go. If you see that ability to try to call in and see whether you want to ask a question to Dr. Mahad, it may or may not work. But that whole idea of, just to be clear, that when people crash, that there really isn't there's no current known reason for why that necessarily happens, and that's something that you're working on. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, Kate. We're very interested, and I have a postdoc, and my team, my lab, are very interested in the exercise aspect.
So what do you feel that people can do now in terms of working with their fatigue or bettering themselves? And again, I recognize we are not asking you for specific medical advice, but certainly for people to keep it on their minds of how to conserve their energy or how to be smart about their future. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the graded physical therapy or the exercise program, where you do a bit more on a good day, make sure you take a rest and gradually build it up, make it more frequent, accepting the fact that there's going to be setbacks, there's going to be bad days, that's a good thing to do, particularly from the physical perspective, right? If you say don't use your muscles, you're going to decondition your muscles. And actually it's very interesting because the muscles have got their own stem cells. So when we run or jog and use the muscle, we mobilize these stem cells and they kind of fuse with the muscle fibers and rejuvenate the muscle fiber. So keep the muscle in a good condition. So by using and exercising, you can really kind of keep the muscle in a good condition, improve the physical aspects. Obviously, it won't really do much for the cognitive aspect. The muscle component obviously doesn't apply to that. So I would really encourage the physical therapy aspect a lot. And the other important thing is to make sure that your MS is under control, right? There's no breakthrough disease, there's no enhancing lesions on your MRI after having gadolinium, and you're on the right drug. I think those are the two key things in terms of making sure your fatigue is controlled. And then everything else really becomes a different layer.
I think there's something enormously powerful of thinking of the work that you're doing now being potentially preventative measures for dealing with harsher symptoms of fatigue. Just in terms of knowing that may be helping your body, the combination of a disease-modifying therapy, with this type of work, and of course diet as well is something that you may not be studying specifically, but is another idea of interest of different things on the external side of your life that you can actually do that may give you, some help within your MS, whether or not it's clinically proven at this time. Right?
Right. So diet-wise, I guess in terms of supplements or vitamins, there's biotin that's been proposed as potentially beneficial. Right. So there's going to be a large phase 3 clinical trial, not so much looking specifically at fatigue, but looking at progressive MS, the progression of it, and there's others like MitoQ, which is FDA approved as a food supplement. It's a mitochondrial targeted antioxidant. So these don't really at present have any evidence base for using, but I'm aware there's quite a few MS patients actually try them. Some find it beneficial, but hopefully maybe with time you will develop studies.
And for what it's worth, I think there are a lot of people in this community who may or may not have heard of Terry Walls. So Terry Walls has something she calls the Walls Protocol. She's a doctor who felt like she really improved her MS through diet. Interestingly enough, she really studied mitochondria and the role of mitochondria and found a way to have supplements in the mix that ended up what we're talking about here. How do you fuel that mitochondria? So I would say she's probably the most famous face of somebody in the MS speaking about mitochondria.
She learned to walk again.
That's right. She did get out of a wheelchair.
Got out of the wheelchair. It's very inspiring to many, I believe.
I think that's true. Are there any questions that anybody has? They can either type them on the right side for Dr. Mahad, or we can attempt to have you call in, which may be sketchy because we've got an amazing clinician researcher who's all the way across the pond, which is making our signal a little weak. Any other questions here? And then, Diane, I would love for you to give some final thoughts in terms of what you've learned or whatever else, and I'll ask the same to you, but I'll give a sec to see if anyone else wants to comment. I will say one earlier that was asked was talking about Kayla Montgomery, who, I don't know if you know who she is, Dr. Mahad, but she is a runner, a young runner that actually is incredibly good, who has MS, and when she crosses the finish line, she collapses as a result of her MS. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that kind of counts in the realm of MS fatigue or just failure or heat or whatever, but she's a definite example of watching someone really push herself to a serious place.
Right. Right, absolutely. We have in Edinburgh, we have 2012 Paralympic gold medalist who obviously does a lot of physical exercise. So there's great role models for keeping active and keeping your body in good condition. Kim, there was a question here from someone saying, so even adults have usable stem cells in their muscles. Yeah, so the stem cells in the muscles just remain, no matter how old we are.
So we're going to try to actually have someone call in, CKA Elquist. I know you gave a request. Why don't you try to call in? We'll see whether or not we can get you in here. We'd love to meet you. Just know that if you don't make it, it has nothing to do with you personally. It's been a technically challenging morning. The flush on my neck is not due to the stress of the technical challenges. It's a Tech Federa flush. Maybe you guys notice it. seen it before.
I get that all the time. Yes.
Okay, here we go. Let's see if we can get you in here. Stand by. And let's see if you're coming on.
No.
Oh, yes.
Hi.
Hello, Christopher.
Hi.
How are you guys? This is
Doing
awesome.
great.
This is awesome. I just got a text from a buddy of mine who like lives in down south, and he was like, I'm trying to get on this Blab thing. I can't find you. And then I like got on, so I'm like poking around Blab trying to find him and find me. And then I saw you guys doing this, and like, this is awesome. I was just sitting here for a couple hours with my mom, who also has MS, talking about what a kick in the balls it is to have MS. And so like, this is great.
Do you deal with fatigue, Christopher?
So bad. I've spent this, I was like just talking to my mom about this. Like, I just like kind of came out of a cloud today. I feel like for, I don't know, 6 days I've been sleeping and then like getting up and eating something or going to the bathroom and then going back to sleep, getting up, considering maybe going to do some errands, going back to sleep. It's been a nightmare. I got a note from my landlord yesterday that was like, what's up? You haven't paid your rent. And I was like, oh shit, I forgot to pay my rent. So yeah.
Right, that's like low on your list of priorities right now. Well, what I like about what Dr. Mahad said in this webcast, and I don't know if you caught it, is that whole thing of recognizing and acknowledging that you have these moments in your fatigue that just rule you, and kind of accepting it and believe that if you actually get rest, that can change.
Yeah,
right?
I totally agree. That's been like part of my deal this past, like, I don't know, year probably, has been working on accepting that when I'm tired, and that's like a fact. That it like there's no like putting my head down and just getting through. That is not an option for me, and that's like a tough thing to accept, but it's true.
Based on what you say, I can really relate to that. It's really a matter of accepting how much you're capable of doing per day from one MSer to another. Because when you could do a lot and then you could do less, it's kind of like you want to do more. So then I personally overexert myself. I never stop. And then like last night, I slept for 10 hours. I don't know if that's normal, but I'm still tired. Put on makeup to like look like I woke up like this.
It's working. Good job, Diana. Well, Dr. Mahad, what I really like is the fact that you have found a way to actually produce scenarios in mice, right? So that now we have a controlled baseline of which to test things, and that's huge progress, correct?
Right. I mean, we think so, Kate. I mean, having a model like that. So we can build in different components. So for example, you know, one of the reasons why just the tiredness might come on, maybe some kind of a subclinical infection, right? So a little bug, a virus, or maybe a subclinical urine infection. So we can build these components onto our model and see what are the environmental factors that could be really, you know, aggravating the behavior that we see in the animals, fatigue. So, and then try and see whether, you know, as Christopher said, I mean, there's no obvious reason to pinpoint why just this tiredness comes on, right? So there must be a biological basis to it that we just don't understand. So I think this model will hopefully give us some insights. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be, you know, give us the cure, but at least it will give us some insight and give us a platform to test different compounds. And working with you know, different pharmaceutical industry, and really I think the Progressive MS Alliance is doing a really fantastic job in, you know, aligning the scientists with the industry and focusing on important aspects like fatigue.
Recognizing it as a symptom that's hugely important to the people themselves, right? It's not the sexiest scientific subject, Dr. Mahad. I'm just throwing it out there. But I love the fact you want to deal with it.
Right.
You know, because it's important.
Right. Well, actually, I see it slightly differently. So when you look at it from an energy failure perspective, it's actually, I think, I mean, you know, we need to look into it to do the proper studies. But I think certain aspects of the performance-related fatigue can actually be like a warning sign, right? So, you know, it must be telling us something about a bunch of nerve cells that are feeling a little vulnerable, right? So if you could really therapeutically target it at that early stage before it gets any worse. So I'm really interested not just the symptomatic aspect with fatigue, but also by influencing the symptom, we may be able to actually protect tissue in the brain and in the spinal cord. You know, so that's another aspect that we can test these in our
which is enormous progress.
in our
Okay,
model.
so Chris, I'm really glad you came on the show. I pray to God that you are in a state where smoking pot is legal.
Totally am.
Okay,
Nice.
good, just making sure. So I'm going to take you off the show, and we're going to close with Diana and Dr. Mahad. Chris, mycounterpain.com. Hope to see you. Thanks for joining in. You were there.
That's awesome. Thank you, guys. Yeah,
I hope your
to see
mom
you
comes
again.
to the next one too. Cool.
Yeah, I've been trying to get her on the blabs. Hopefully she will.
I get it. Well, that's great. All right. So Diana, any closing thoughts you want about this webcast or beyond?
Well, I thank you and your team of researchers for constantly working hard for people like us. That's pretty amazing. I took some notes here, energy failure, things to keep in mind about how to conserve the energy when I'm feeling a little less, not to bully myself when that happens because it's the nerve cell. And thank you. I did learn a lot here, and I hope that we can end MS and fatigue. I hope people can find what works for them to have as much energy through the course of their days.
It's great. And
Thank
Dr.
you.
Mahad, so anything else that you want to mention that I didn't bring up that people living with fatigue need to know?
I think we covered quite well, Kit. I'd just like to kind of, just remind everyone that, bringing science into fatigue is really exciting from a scientist perspective, but I think it's really an important way of trying to develop new drugs. And I guess we've got an example of a model, and this hopefully is going to give some insight. And probably the timing is quite pertinent because the Progressive MS Alliance is also trying to achieve the same kind of goal as what we are trying to do. So the different pieces are coming together, and hopefully the next few years would be.
Well, as somebody who gets to interact with researchers like you, I can absolutely validate that and verify that fact. There's a lot of exciting research coming down the pike. And Dr. Mahad, thank you so much for joining us on a very technically interesting journey. It worked out okay. And we will be having more Empowered by webcasts, and we will be sending out via our newsletter and otherwise information on when and where they are with a range of different researchers and doctors who are totally kick-ass. And in the interim, I hope that you will consider joining My Counterpain to tell a little bit of your story and continuing to interact with us because we certainly aim to not only make you feel better, but be better. This is Kate Milliken signing off for Empowered By, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.